for making time for us at Nice Samvaad. And a warm welcome to you on behalf of Nice. And so what we will do today is I will leave it to you to make introductory remarks and to set the context, so to speak, for this afternoon, to give us a sense of how you see, sitting where you do currently, right at the very critical position, important position, bird's eye view, so to speak, of what's happening in India's consumer sector. If you can walk us through the important trends and challenges and possibilities that you see, that will set the context for our conversation. So over to you, Samvaad. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And what I'll do is maybe spend the next 5 minutes to give a kind of a perspective on how this sector and future trends. First of all, I think I must say that in relation to all the other activity that is going on, we consider ourselves boringly consistent. It's a relatively boring sector. And interestingly, this is the sector, while getting disrupted, the propensity for disruption is far lower. And the reason, if you look at some of the global consumer brands, if you look at technology, if you look at electronics, if you look at all these brands, the average life of a brand is been maximum a century, sometimes under a century. In fact, that day we were talking about on startups, when the life of a brand or a life of an organization earlier used to be what I call human years. Right now, and a lot of brands, it's dog years, some 10 organization. FMCG or CPG brands have actually transcended centuries. So if you look at some of the, whether it's Coke, you look at Kellogg, you look at Colgate, they have survived actually 200, 300 years. And the reason is that, the disruption that happens in the sector has been more incremental rather than completely disruptive. Now, if you really look at the FMCG, and I want to just give this as a starter and then for you to, then talk about trends. If you really look at to be successful in FMCG business, you need actually 4 things. You need to have a right portfolio, and a portfolio technically needs to have tailwind. You need to have the right go-to market, which is extremely important. You need to have a right cost structure, because at the end of the day, you have to deliver value at the lowest possible cost to the consumer. And you need to have good processes, talent, and essentially, if you really look at it, FMCG has been the training ground for a lot of talent, and because it has a very, if you look at FMCG sector, it has very robust management trainee programs, talent management programs, good processes, very high degree of, relatively, I think, governance, ethics, and all that. So I think that's the broad this one. Now, in a country like India and all emerging markets, actually 2 things drive a sector growth, FMCG or any consumer or adjacent products. One is affordability, other is availability. And if you really look at it, if you make the product available and you make the product within reach, and this is just not consumer goods. You look at telecom in India, you look at airlines, aviation in India, and of course, unfortunately, in a lot of sectors, either because of extraneous circumstances or some kind of issues which have faced the sector, telecom and aviation was actually great stories in India, where actually affordability and availability drove that. And when there is privatized, when it's relatively less regulated, I think it thrives. So therefore, I think the good thing about FMCG is that there are 2, 3, 4 still huge headroom for growth. In India, especially food, not so much in personal care, I think there's a huge amount of unbranded or unorganized players. And therefore, a lot of growth happens from unbranded to branded. The second driver of growth is penetration. And if you look at other than some of the some categories which are mass items like maybe soap, maybe in some of the hair care products, this one where penetration is high, there is a significant scope of penetration, like in skincare, in personal care, and a lot of packaged food. And packaged food penetration is, I think, one of the lowest, and therefore it's there's a huge headroom for growth. And whenever disposable income keeps on growing, FMCG sector grows. And a good thing which a lot of FMCG companies look at is that a good growth is basically 2x times GDP growth, because for an FMCG company to grow. Now, coming to this one, I think in sectors, however, where penetration is high, definitely in categories where penetration is high, the growth will come from what I call premiumization of formats. For example, let's take the case of detergents. The entire growth in the detergent category, where perhaps today penetration is near about 100%, has happened with formats, which is earlier it was a bar, a powder, a liquid, and then with growth of washing machines, for example, the washing machine powder and liquid, of course, pods are still not popular in India, but actually the format innovation drives this one. And the reason I said that disruption doesn't happen so much in FMCG is because other than very few things, I mean, there is still a product to be developed that prevents baldness completely. There are very few, I think anti-aging in skincare perhaps is a great innovation. A thing like a Tide pen that just covers up stains, a great innovation. But if you really want to think about innovations or really breakthrough innovations in CPG in the last 15-20 years, you have to really scratch your heads. If you cross 10 or 15, it's been incremental. Having said that, I think there are 3-4 things that's emerging as trends. Number one, with, as I said, that increased disposable income, people want strong brands as long as they're affordable and available. And that is one of the reasons in India, very interestingly, outlay is important. So even if there is a premium brand like a Dove, if you can price it at 3 rupees, actually you can grow. The second thing, the driver of growth in India is, of course, demographic dividend, and the fact that you have a certain population growth and people entering the urbanization, the people entering the work life, it brings in a huge sector of growth. The third driver which has been significantly driven actually in the last couple of years, first by I think organized retail and now by e-commerce, is actually people exploring different food and packaged food on the driver of convenience. Health has been a recent metric, health and immunity, I think is here to stay because I think people are wanting this one. Having said that, India, one of the interesting things in India, and this is our learning when we launched our baked snacks, we failed, is that unlike in the Western world, Indians will not compromise taste for health. So in a Western world, if you have a baked snack or similar product, people are prepared to compromise 10%, 20% taste for health. India, it's unlikely to compromise. So therefore, that is, I think, unique in India. Other than, of course, outlay and sachet, which is very, very unique in India. Coming to, I think, therefore, some of the other trends in India, I think, which are interesting and different from the rest of the world. If you look at India, hyper-segmentation is not something. If you look at the skincare regimen of someone in Japan and Korea, there'll be 7-8 products. India wants multiplication. So if there's a product that drives, skin lightening, and you need to bundle it with, other benefits with the same product. So there is this concept of the value-seeking consumer will look at 2-in-1, 3-in-1, 4-in-1. And that's one of the reasons perhaps, category like a conditioner has not grown. The second thing which is unique to India, therefore, is that if you look at in a lot of categories, while I know all the consulting firms would have explained the potential of India with that huge middle class, the premiumization opportunity is reasonably shallow. And this is something which a lot of people underestimate because people are still actually, there's a huge penetration task with a basic set of products. Having said that, yeah, I think you will be surprised at, so if you look at, say, the propensity to consume something in technology is far higher than a premiumization potential in a FMCG product. So I might still be buying a 25 rupee FMCG product and I'll be value seeking, but I'll buy a 10,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees smartphone. So I think something which is, what I call external, which people are seeing, I'll spend myself on fashion, I'll I need not necessarily premiumize on FMCG. So therefore, I still might have a basic coffee, but I will be okay to spend something on phone. So therefore, I think that premiumization thing in FMCG in India is something has been a little bit of a struggle. Having said that, I think a modern trade and a e-commerce have driven some sort of premiumization, which brings me to the second area where I think consumers, I talked about consumer trends, that consumers are value seeking. There is significant opportunity in health. There's significant opportunity in packaged food. There's obviously opportunity in skincare. There's an opportunity. Having said that, I was saying that the premiumization opportunity, while it's high, I think India is still not as developed compared to some of the countries, other emerging markets in LATAM and Southeast Asia. The second thing is, of course, unique to India, I talked about, is pack sizes. Now, let me come to the channel. India has been a traditional general trade market. Having said that, of late, in the last 10 years, we had organized retail, which is modern trade. And then now we are having e-commerce. And in fact, post-COVID, there has been a significant explosive growth of e-commerce. What could have grown in 3 to 4 years has got compressed to a 1 year growth. And therefore, today we have a situation where e-commerce and modern trade are almost converging in terms of contribution. Having said that, India is a unique place, unlike in some of the Western markets and the markets in Asia where the general pop and bomb store has died down. India, the pop and bomb store is very much alive and it will continue to thrive. And the reason is in the 3-4 things. The average Kirana store owners are the most savvy retailers in the world, according to me. Nowhere else in the world at 10:30 in the night, if you order a can of Diet Coke, it will be delivered to you in 20 minutes. And that's why I think forced all these Instamarts and other things. The second thing is, in a traditional hierarchy, in a business which has come from ancestor to ancestor, they don't take the cost of rental and their own labor cost or their own cost into their ROI. And therefore, that cost economics, and that's the reason in India, I think the 7-Eleven format has not succeeded in India. It's very difficult to, because of the real estate and other cost. Right. So therefore, I think it is an and situation in India. So therefore, there will be enough people who will say, e-commerce, modern trade will eat this one up. In fact, in the last 1.5, 2 years, they have done very well post-COVID. And in the last 2-3 years, there is this huge impetus of the traditional retailer, modernizing their own store, what we call standalone open format stores. So for example, he will bring in air conditioning. He will move that closed format to open format. He will rationalize SKUs. It will be a cleaner store. And therefore, there's a silent Kirana revolution is going on. And therefore, even in 2030, let me tell you, you will have a very, very thriving general trade. However, what is changing is there's significant disruption happening in other formats. For example, there are significant formats in omnichannel. There are formats like what I talked about, the 30-minute hyper local delivery. There is a cash and carry, which will substitute. So traditional distribution systems are getting disrupted. Earlier, there was these traditional distributors, which were, retailer being serviced by a distributor who used to take the order, then deliver it. Today, there are logistics firms. There are professional large-scale distribution houses where they're going to come up. There'll be a cash and carry. So therefore, there'll be significant, this one in the disruption in the entire distribution system. The last area where there is significant disruption happening is digital adoption by consumers. So even if I buy a thing from a Kirana, I might be actually checking it out in some other digital environment and ordering through a WhatsApp. So therefore, what is happening is significant digital adoption, and that is a place where a lot of disruption is happening. And again, it has got accelerated post-COVID. The last area where I would talk about a trend before I close this is happening in the FMCG sector is the growth of entrepreneur-driven and PE-funded a lot of niche brands. It has happened in much more in personal care, digital brands, but significant amount is also happening in food. And this is an opportunity which I think traditional FMCG companies have been slow to capitalize on. And the reason they have been slow to capitalize on is a traditional FMCG company believes in a repeatable model of growth, which is based on scale, efficiency, and a certain velocity of innovation, which is completely different, but what is the requirement of the operating model required for these entrepreneurs? They are far more nimble. They think big, start small, scale up fast. The velocity of innovation, something which in my core business takes 8 to 10 months, will take 30 days. They do a much more test and learn. Their risk appetite is very high. What we call tail SKUs are the hero SKUs. Therefore, they love fragmentation, they love proliferation, and therefore a significant amount of growth. So, for example, I keep on telling my team that the onion oil, hair oil idea should have come from us, but it came from somebody else. The apple cider. So, if you look at some of these companies, whether it's Mama Earth, whether it's Wow, whether it's Plum, and I think there has been a significant amount of growth which traditional FMCG companies have not capitalized on, which have been capitalized on. And this is the biggest trend. And if you look at US today, the new age consumers who want brands with a purpose, brands with, brands which make a difference, brands which meet unmet needs, brands which are not large, and therefore traditional FMCG companies have ceded space. So in US, traditional FMCG companies have got squeezed on both ends. One, by these digital brands at the top end, and by the channel, which is the growth of Amazon, Walmart, which has been far more significant and dominant in US. And as a result, if you look at the Ps which we enjoy in India, are 4 to 5 times the kind of Ps which FMCG companies, CPG companies enjoy in US. And that's because of this. Because in India, rural distribution is still an entry barrier, although the entry barrier to grow in digital is actually rapidly diminishing. And therefore, I believe that could be the beginning of the first large-scale disruption that can happen in the for the FMCG monoliths like us, if we don't start capitalizing. In fact, I can share with you one example which I proudly share, that one of the brands we have acquired called Beardo, and it's an entrepreneur. And the two things, in fact, I told somebody the other day, which I did right in Beardo, is first thing, not doing anything. So when we got 100% integrated, we sent someone to run the company, but we never interfered. We never sent 10 MBAs there, because that's the worst thing that can happen. Being a part of that, clan, I can tell you that if I had sent, I didn't want to Americanize that brand. And the second thing which I did is that we developed and consciously asked them to, continue with their operating model. Only 3 things we control is capital. The second 3 we control is quality, because that has a reputation risk. And the third is compliance. I actually meet the Beardo CEO once in 90 days. Because if I had met him more frequently, I would have done a disservice to that, this one, rather than doing a service. So to me, that is one area where FMCG companies are extremely vulnerable. And the second thing, which is the changes that are happening in the what I call the distribution channel and the supply chain channel. Having said that, I think there is significant opportunity for growth. India has a huge democratic dividend. India has a significant opportunity for headroom in terms of penetration, young set of consumers wanting to consume more. And therefore, I think it's an exciting term ahead. But I guess the 3 things which we have to look at is the entire disruption by smaller players, the entire thing in digital, and the entire disruption in I call distribution and logistics. So these are the potential areas of disruption. Having said that, I think FMCG companies will continue to perform consistently well, whether for the investors and also for the markets as a whole, and also for the internal, this one, in terms of continuing to offer robust, but to an extent, I come back to the boringly consistent growth.
So thanks very much, Sagar. That was a pretty expansive exposition on the lay of the land of the consumer sector in India. And you talked of both the opportunities as well as the unlikelihood of existing majors like Marico getting disrupted anytime soon by any of the newer players, as long as one is aware of what's happening with regard to digitalization, with regard to being aware of channels and letting them do their own thing. You talked also about the importance of having this well-rounded product portfolio, a go-to-market approach, being aware of your unit costs and ensuring that your processes, etc., are in place. Now, typically for a lot of younger companies that are kind of entrepreneur driven, Does that mean that the larger entities that are looking at a well-rounded product portfolio can expect to see a fair bit of M&A or acquisition kinds of opportunities emerge for them as they grow?
So I think, let me tell you, there are two things. One is, and I said this before, I've said that there are three models which entrepreneurs have today. One is build to sell, build to scale, and build to last. And I think if it is a build to scale and a build to last, I think smart entrepreneurs understand that when is it to introduce, system processes, when is it to introduce the next set of talent. And because the 0 to 100, 100 to 500 crores, and then 500 to 2,500 crores, the journeys are different. It is not linear, but the needs and this one is different. Now coming to what I call these opportunities for M&A. Where does a strategic investor drive value for these brands is only when they have saturated the full potential of digital, move to perhaps modern trade, and then wanting to get into a larger distribution. Otherwise, I think, and that is where I think a strategic investor adds value. A strategic investor also can bring down costs with scale and other processes. So yes, there will be some M&A, and I believe that, and I think, as I said, that we trying to identify entrepreneurs who are building to scale as likely potential partners. What is also important, and I'll give you an example. We acquired one more company, 51% stake in Just Herbs. But this company, it's a Mastige forest essentials for those who don't know about this brand. I think one of the things we have agreed is to let the founders run it and take value from us whenever they want to. Because I think, as I said, that you can't be the best in the world in running two operating models. I think that operating model is best served by them, and they can always tap into synergies. So I would think, to answer the question, yes, there will be many opportunities, but tomorrow there could be equally opportunities for people to scale up. And while it's not a brand, but Nykaa is a glorious example of entity scaling up, and I mean they are talking about an IPO. I think it's one of the, I think, a great example of, although it's not a consumer brand, but it's a e-commerce, this one, but it's a great example of brands which have successfully scaled up. I think it's one of the best example of, because it's also profitable.
Okay, so that's a good segue to the other question I wanted to ask. Given that Marico is a behemoth in the Indian FMCG space, and you mentioned about this 51% stake in Just Herbs, which is like you said, a forest essentials kind of company, and you kept it such that the founders continue to run it. And going by what you said, that seems to be the philosophy behind behind your thinking, that let the entrepreneurs keep doing what they do best and tap into someone like Marico to get the benefit of the scale and size and processes and all of that. Now, it's interesting that you looked at a company like Just Herbs. Now, what are your own thoughts about more such brands emerging and growing and forming partnerships with the likes of Marico and other companies, brands that are in the space of, let's say, Ayurveda, which, and you talked about health, you talked about wellness, packaged foods, etc., etc. A lot of it is going to be based upon some notion of authenticity, some notion of Indianness, Indian heritage, and so on, because that is a vast segment of the market opportunity. What are your own thoughts about that segment going forward, to the kinds of companies you think that will emerge? See the potential for those companies to form partnerships with the likes of large entities, say Marico.
So I think if I look at some of the, and Ayurveda is I think a good case in point. I believe that we need to be certainly differentiated, and because there will be Ayurveda A, Ayurveda B. I think there are two things which I believe is differentiation and I would say efficacy also, because I think efficacy and authenticity is extremely important. Having said that, if I look at, Ayurveda, yoga, and other things. I think it's strange, but something which is familiar is not exotic. And therefore, what happens if I see the root of yoga, if you root of Ayurveda, it's exotic in the West. And therefore, how do you create modern world-class products? And there are enough examples of that, where Indian entrepreneurs can create, this one. I mean, I just named La Forest Essential. There are a lot of, there's interesting products which can be created, which are authentic. And then I think the route back, the acceptance is much easier. Like haldi doodh is very everyday, but the moment you call it, turmeric latte, it becomes a little, and you can, of course, so I think I think that is one route that, and I think it's best done by I think there is enough today platforms to enter the market in US, and I can share with you, even as there are Ayurvedic products. There are a couple of tea brands which have actually, which started off with in the sense that as a digital e-commerce, they are now available in Whole Foods and some of the others ones. So I think there is, to me, that route is a very interesting route also. And I would say that, for companies like us, it's better to do mass scale. I would still believe entrepreneur-driven niche brands have a far better, opportunities out there, whether it's in the developed markets or even in India, to do it.
And clearly, there is opportunity for them to partner with the larger entities in some form and shape, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's how your portfolio also grows, and you start serving niches that are small today, but can become big tomorrow.
I think the partnership, and I think in distribution and sharing costs, sharing processes, I think there is significant opportunity for partner. But I must say that not many large houses have that spirit of partnership. It's important, as I said, the let go.
Yeah.
I think this, if you don't let go, then this thing will not flourish. And
correct.
You can't. Otherwise, the bird will be shackled.
Yeah, and you used an interesting turn of phrase. You said the mariquization of the entrepreneur's energy and the focus needs to be sort of kept under check.
And that too, for a company, we are relatively more empowered and agile.
Yes.
And compared to a lot of companies. And I think I'll just use a nice, interesting term which we use. As an organization, we want to see, we have been successful by punching above our weight. And therefore, as we scale up, we want to become what I call a scaled insurgent and not an incumbent. And I think a partnership with a scaled insurgent will be far better for these brands than with the incumbent.
And one other thing I want to sort of take up on what you said. You talked about the disruption taking place thanks to the penetration of digital means, newer technologies emerging, and therefore bypassing the entire real estate cost business of traditional brick and mortar and all of that, going direct to consumer. And therefore, with growing consumer growth and demand, with growing access of mobile phones and the logistics capabilities in the country, do you see that brands that serve direct to consumer and only direct to consumer without any offline presence at all, do you see that becoming a big piece of the Indian consumer sector?
So I think if I really look at it, it can become big only at the premium end. It's unlikely to be at the mass end, because at the end of the day, mass distribution and mass media, that value equation is still going to be in favor. So yes, I think it is important that even manufacturers recognize these new channels as drivers of premiumization. D2C is also very interesting. And one of the reasons why a lot of FMCG companies having their own D2C site is the first time you get to own data. And so let me tell you the perspective. We started our site, because of the pandemic, it was starting to distribute Saffola. Now, it's not that unit economics for us doesn't make sense, but at the same time, we are using this channel for learning. It's a great opportunity to interact with consumers directly because FMCG company don't have access to consumers otherwise. It's a great thing for testing things. So I would say that it has a lot more learning opportunity for us, and a certain portfolio fits in. Not all portfolios can be D2C because you have to be, for example, I'll give you an example in India. Unless the cost is $8 to $10, the average AOV, the D2C unit and a 70% GM, or you call it, in the D2C terminology, a CM1, as you call it, 70. If you don't have that, you will never have the unit economics. And that is one of the interesting reasons. Have you noticed that largely D2C brands are personal care, less food? Food brands are little more brick and mortar. If you look at, and also because a lot of new brands, and food requires a little more scale because margins are lower.
So, that's an interesting thing. But, if I was to have D2C brands and let's say in local languages, and I'm catering to a very different demographic with local servicing of the demand through the Kirana stores and stuff where the last mile logistics takes place. Does it make sense to think about products that are quote unquote desi in their heritage, in their look and feel and usage, which may not be a very pan-India phenomenon, but I could have a series of small, let's say smallish niches in different parts of the country, but which are serviced as D2C.
So I have a different point of view to this.
Yeah.
See, and I'll give you an example for you to understand this. If you look at these idli mixers and all that, whatever data I have, they are going to be popular more not in South India, but other parts of India. So I think this can work because it's very difficult to compete. In the case of food, it's very difficult to compete with the kitchen, the cost of doing it. So I would think it will only work if it's convenience. For example, I think this entire idli dosa batter is the biggest example of that it's a convenience thing. Or if I'm missing something, so if you look at a lot of Indian food, which is packaged food, which is carried by students or the software professionals into US, but it's unlikely. Having said that, I think a premium brand is, like, for example, let me mention not food brands, but maybe a food brand also, but let me just mention that if you look at brands which actually give Indian khadi, take a brand like Fab India. Even in food, I think Kitchens of India, for example. There are brands which I believe, even a Titan Raga. I'm just giving you examples of Indian brands, Indian heritage at the premium end. I think there is enough opportunity for consumption. And if you really look at some of these brands I mentioned in terms of adoption, and the success has been extremely, extremely high. Kitchens of India, of course, okay, it's because of the nature of the fact that packaged food is this one. But I believe even, this entire idli dosa ID which they have done, I think it's another example of a habit which has been modernized. Because what's happening is essentially today, because of paucity of time and issue on convenience, or I think there is a thing of Indian, and there is a far more pride today. And I think that is the other more interesting thing that has emerged, that today there's a huge pride in something which is Indian. But I think it has to be, if it is to be successful in a D2C format, it has to be packaged in a little more premium this one way, and people will have takers.
So what you're saying is it will have takers, but it needs to be packaged and positioned right.
But if it's the mass end, it will be very difficult to compete because unit economics will never
work. Right. Okay. Now, with regard to the points you made, saying, look, it's going to take a while for any of these products to really make a dent because of the fact that apart from the premium segment, the rest of it is kind of hard to break into, given the costs and everything else. How much of it do you think is tied into the per capita income situation of India, right? We are still a $2,000 per capita country with a median income, let's say about $600 to $700. And we tend to compare with larger economies with significantly higher per capita incomes. So if we get to a position of, let's say, $3,000 or $4,000 per capita, which means the median income also shifts by, let's say, a factor of at least 2.5x, does that kind of signify a tipping point in your view?
So absolutely, because I'll tell you the thing, because of the sheer numbers of people having that income, given the population of India,
right?
I think it is. And as I said, that I think the propensity to purchase on things which have a little bit of what I call lifestyle, or, if I call it, badge value, is always very high. So, I mean, if I look at, India is a very strange market. If you look at cars, for example, yes, some of the brands are moving out because they couldn't have a profitable model at the mass end. But if you look at some of the luxury cars today, I think, and with all the, the pricing, which is not at all competitive compared to other markets, it's thriving. So I think there is a market there. But what I am arriving at is that if you want scale, there is an opportunity which is bigger in India, which is to serve. And that's why I keep on reinforcing, whatever has happened to the sector, forget it. But if I look at the telecom and the aviation revolution, if I call it, in India, look at when you make the thing affordable and available, actually that scale is very high. And therefore, I think a tipping point, according to me, is making it a little affordable to a significant section, and then it follows an exponential curve. Because one of the things is that people desire good brands. People want, India is an ambitious country. Everybody wants to, and if you look at the strive is very high. And I think, private consumption will only increase if there is, I think, the entire, and I'm sure the government is looking into it, the complexity and cost of doing business, if it comes down, actually products will become affordable.
Okay, so let me, a few more minutes of time left. So a couple of questions from the audience that have come in. One is from Manosh Sengupta. He says, what's your take on low innovation that is there in product development in the FMCG sector? Innovation seems to be the buzzword in all industries, but in the sector of FMCG, for some reason, according to Manosh, innovation doesn't seem to be very high. What's your view on that?
So as I said, I think at the end of the day, I think the sector has driven far more incremental innovation. And see, we are not like pharma or anything high tech, and which is I think it's a series of incremental innovations. And I think, and a lot of innovations, if you look at FMCG, has happened in formats. For example, and sachet is an innovation. Okay, that happened 25, 30 years ago. Or there are innovations. It's not that innovation. I think the innovation is in a format to drive convenience or affordability. And that has been the biggest innovation, which significant amount of innovation happening. The area which I believe that they will see much more innovation is, I think, sustainability in packaging, for example. At the end of the day, I think at this industry, we are committed as an industry to reduce the amount of plastic, especially multi-layer, 3-layer, and you will see over the next 5 to 7 years significant innovation I see in packaging, and to drive sustainability, for example.
There's a question from Vikram Gawande. There is this whole buzz around what's called the Thrasio model of new business model, where D2C brands all get aggregated across multiple categories under one roof. And then this house of heterogeneous brands, how is that looked at by someone in your position? Or do you think, how will end consumers look at it? How do you think markets will react to it?
So I think this model works because it gives you significant scale advantages in terms of shared capability, whether it's a tech stack, whether it's logistics, whether it's some of the other cost structures. I think there has to be some kind of a homogeneity in terms of size and the models and the stage in which these brands in. There are one or two such houses right now. I think, and similarly, I think there are also examples of somebody who just invests in millennial brands. For example, the commonality could be millennial brands. There are fund LPs in venture capitalists in US which do millennial brands. So the commonality is the consumer. It could be right. So I would think that there is a case in point, because what it does is it gives tremendous scale or efficiencies in capabilities and synergies, a lot of things which individual brands will never be able to.
Now, given our focus on entrepreneurs and given your vantage position, what are the new skills, competencies, capabilities you think that an entrepreneur starting off today or who has just started today in an FMCG area, what are those skills, competencies, capabilities they need to build within themselves in their organizations so that over the next 3 to 5 years, they are able to create something of value?
So I think I shouldn't be sermonizing, first of all, because if I would have been on the other side. I would have loved to be on the other side, But I think whatever little I've seen is, I think it has to be a great idea which is scalable and differentiated, and continuously innovating. I think innovation, and which means significant capability of understanding consumer needs and trends, for example, and being able to actually drive those trends. And I talked about, it could be an ingredient. I mean, there's this brand called Innisfree. It's a Korean brand, and it all started off with an ingredient called Jeju volcanic ash. Now it could be any, or activated charcoal, for example, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I mean, nobody would have thought of. They would have thought you were talking of the coal industry or something. So I think it's ability to spot something. The second thing is significant amount of what I call velocity of innovation. I would say significant amount of people underestimated operational excellence, because if I look at the logistics, the entire cost management, and I would say fourth, which is important, is investing ahead of the curve, and for especially entrepreneurs in our industry, D2C, and this one is digital marketing, performance marketing, this entire area of tech, investing ahead of the curve on that. And knowing what to insource, when to insource, and what to outsource, depending on
and when to partner with people. Okay. Question from Vidya says, do you think we are going to see an explosion of brands across categories? You talked about built to last, built to sell, and so on. Are we going to see built to sell so that it lasts? So that, it's a cycle that keeps on going on.
Yeah, but I think build to sell, if it is passing the parcel, and building to sell to a strategic to last, are two different models altogether. And as a strategic, I will not take a passing the parcel, because it's already, it's maxed for valuation. So I'll just give you an interesting example, and this is nothing to do with D2C, but I know we have done a lot of acquisitions, and we are far more comfortable with a decent brand badly managed than an average brand very well managed. And we are now avoid, average to decent brands very well managed, because that means there is no upside for an acquisition for guys like us. So I would think there will be a proliferation of brands, simply because today's new set of consumers want to experiment. They don't like they like brands with a purpose. They want to. So the brand loyalty per se has, come down for traditional large brands. Having said that, let me tell you, Indian CPG brands enjoy the highest amounts of retention percentages, or still loyalty, amongst very few countries other than Indonesia, and very few countries where these kind of, retention rates are high. The brand loyalty is very high still. I think people I think there's a significant, this one with like clean beauty, there's a trend, health, there's a trend, there are all these trends, out of which I would say, if there are 10 trends, you will see a lot of proliferation of brands, but some trends will actually scale up. And according to me, I would say that yes, there will be a proliferation of brands. There will be far more successful brands, but initially the kind of a decay rate or lapse or kill rate will be also equally high.
which means that there is going to be this continuous birth, death, recycle kind of movement happening, right? Because as the consumer needs change, affordability goes up and all the rest of it, right? That
And
becomes
I would say the other thing will be serial entrepreneurs who are
serial entrepreneurs,
building.
right?
I think there are, I have already seen, like for example, the earlier promoters of Beardo, they are now onto something else, because all these are youngsters, and therefore I would see a significant trend of serial entrepreneurs today.
That's a good thing, because the life cycle experience of running companies is there starting.
And let me tell you, after 5 or 7 years, the hit rates will become far higher.
Far higher.
Because they will keep on, they will actually perfect. There is a playbook.
Correct.
For a successful D2C.
Yes.
And that perfect will be.
And what we are seeing in the tech industry is that it will start getting replicated with more of the entrepreneurs starting on the second and third ventures and using the experiences and learnings of the past.
And
so
to me,
And
to me, the FMCG sector, unless they build what we call an engine 2 core, this opportunity will actually get picked up by the entrepreneur-driven brands opposed to this sector, because.
Correct. No, I agree. And so, on that very, let's say, positive note for entrepreneurs, that the future is ahead and it's for them to innovate and seize the opportunity and take advantage of all the things that you talked about in great detail about the changing trends and so on. Thank you very much, Saugata, for making time. I know you're in Calcutta, and responding to this from a hotel room. Thank you so much. Thank you also very much for being on our Industry Experts Council. It's a great asset for us to have you there. And thanks everybody for joining in. And Saturday, it's before a long weekend, October 2nd and all that. And so thank you all for joining in and listening to Saugata. And these are all great opportunities, great moments when we get to hear from people like him, who we otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to touch base with. So with that, thank you all very much once again. Good evening and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Saugata.